Hello, everybody. It has been a little bit. As I've explained before in the past, I do these when I feel compelled to. And while there's a lot that's going on, I feel that the YouTube space is filled with a wonderful variety of videos that are more than adequate to keep up with our searches and our search for knowledge, etc. So over the weekend, I had the honor and privilege of being brought into the Scottish Rite. So I was made a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. And it was a very profound experience. Very long experience, but a very profound experience. And if you're wondering, it is a little bit dark in here. We don't change clocks. So while everyone's falling back, of course, it would be really dark and regardless, but our clocks stay consistent, which is something I'm very thankful for, not having to deal with daylight savings time. But it is a little bit dark outside, so my little den here is pretty dark as well, so you'll have to forgive that. Anyhow, so the purpose of this video, what I want to talk about today, is kind of a recap of the differences, as I understand them, between Blue Lodge Masonry, Scottish Rite Masonry, the York Rite, and a few other things. I kind of wanted to contrast and compare and give a summary of what I think that these things are about from my own perspective, in my own words. And the perspective that I'm using is from someone who has been a part of esoteric traditions and orders for over 30 years. So 3 decades of seeing different things gives me a different perspective than someone coming in brand new, fresh-eyed off the street. So that I want to preface with that. I think it's very important that when you're listening to someone's opinion, you get an idea of their background and context and whatnot, because that helps shape what they're saying and where they're coming from. So I have friends who ask a lot, well, what is Freemasonry about? Because the public knows what the public knows. And the public has known what the public has known about Freemasonry for a long time. And they have their own opinions. So I want to address some of that real quick. And part of that ties into like why I became a Freemason. And if you followed this channel for any length of time, you already know my story. But as a quick recap, I have attempted to become a Freemason. It took 3 times. And the first 2 times it was because first time I was 19, 20 years old, I want to say 20 years old. And I was stationed at Fort Knox in Kentucky. And one of the rules that lodge had, that I was told, was that you had to belong to a church. And I am not a religious person. I grew up Catholic and then was forcibly converted to evangelicism for a few years. And I had my fill of church at that point for a variety of reasons. And so I did not become a Freemason at 20 years old. My next attempt at becoming a Freemason, I was roughly 32, 33 years old. I was working at a company, and a good number of the guys I worked with were Freemasons. And they said, man, because we used to have philosophical and esoteric discussions. And they said, this is something you would love. You need to check this out. And so I did. And again, this was in Kentucky. This was in Louisville. And I was told again, you have to, we prefer you to belong to a church. So I said, I'm good. So to me, I knew from what I had studied about Freemasonry that it was not supposed to be a religious organization, but my first 2 encounters with it required admission or required me to belong to a church, which felt weird. And it wasn't until I came out west that on my third attempt, I I did join Freemasonry well later in my life, which I kind of regret on one hand, but there's a lot of things I wish I could do that at my age I'm not going to be able to do. Um, so once you get into, once you get north of 50 years old, you know that you're running on the time given to you by God. Any day can be your last day. So, and that can be at any age. That can happen to you when you're 22 years old as well. And I understand that. But a lot of the things that I would like to do require 15, 20 years of service. And I don't know that I'll be here in 15 or 20 years. So it is what it is. And things happen when they're supposed to happen. So this was when I was supposed to become one. And before that, I said I've been in a few esoteric orders as well, Rosicrucian based, Druidic based, things of that nature. So a lot of what I have seen here does not surprise or shock or challenge me in a way that it would have when I was younger and hadn't been exposed to that before. So when I came into my ceremonies, I was already kind of seasoned on what to expect without knowing what was going to happen. I was familiar. Then we can also discuss maybe the past life thing, but we're not going to get into that right now. So that was I came in late in life. Now, the public opinion, Freemasonry used to be fairly highly regarded. Our forefathers of this country, many of them were Freemasons. And having gone through most of the advanced degrees now, the publicly facing advanced degrees, I should say, I understand why they were, and I understand the importance of what those degrees are trying to teach. I also understand why people who don't know any better would think the things that they do, and they're completely erroneous or colored through dogma. And I'll discuss those things. So the first issue, of course, I grew up again Catholic, and where I grew up, as part of our catechism that we had to take, we had to learn about a variety of the evils in the world, and one of those was the Freemasons. The Freemasons were, in my Catholic church, listed as an evil. They didn't really give a good explanation why. Usually people throw the word cult around. It's a cult. My family, most of my family highly opposes what I do, and they just figure I'm in some evil cult. Because everything's a cult. If it's not what you believe in, it's obviously a cult. And that's what growing up taught me, which is why I'm so amenable to other religions and orders, because I understand, for me, my perspective is that there are multiple paths to God. There's not just one. And nature shows us that. One of the examples of nature, the most beautiful forms of nature, is a white light going through a prism splitting into multiple colors, showing you that they all come from the same source, but they all have different appearances and vibrational frequencies. That's how I look at religion and dogma in general. So the history of where, Freemasonry is, and I'm just addressing isn't it evil? Isn't it a cult? Isn't it all that stuff? I'm going to address that up in the front. There are two, as far as from my research goes, there's two main sources of where that comes from. The first was the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, the Roman Church is what I call it, butchered probably millions of people in their history, killed them ruthlessly. From the Hermetic scholars of the early apostolic era to the Cathars in France, who were ruthlessly murdered, to all of the women killed throughout Europe and North America in the witch hunts. They did not like to be challenged in their thinking. And one of the big no-nos of Freemasonry that the Catholic Church, the Roman Church, does not like is that we are open to any religion as long as you believe in God. That's the one thing that Freemasons require, that you believe in God. And this is why it was weird to me, as I knew that from my studies in other orders, that that's what Freemasonry was supposed to be about. So when I attempted to join in Kentucky and was told you had to belong to a Christian church, that kind of threw me because it's supposed to be open to anything. And I'm sure they have their reasons. I don't know what those reasons are, and I'm not going to dwell on it because that's not my life any longer. But going back to the church, they don't like that we accept Jews or we accept Muslims or we accept Hindus or we accept Buddhists. It doesn't matter because of dogma. Dogma states that my belief is the only correct belief. And the Roman Church states that they are the only way to get to heaven. You have to be through them. And so by us allowing and being side by side with other religions, that to them is proof positive that we're evil, because only the devil would do that. That's what they say. To me, that's ridiculous. But to a dogmatic person, that makes total sense. And I was raised in a dogmatic household, so I fully understand that perspective, though I also wholly disagree with it. That's where the Masons are evil stemmed from. Now, it got kickstarted in the 1800s. Let it be known that what we do in Lodge is freely available to the public. All of the rituals are on, you can find them if you want to. If you want to know what we do, you can get a hold of that. And that's been that way for a few hundred years now, because all of the, quote, secrets were written to the public in the 1700s and on, okay? For a secret society that has lodges out in public, they're doing a really bad job. But in the 1800s, there was a guy whose pen name was Taxel. I've actually ordered a big book coming about this, his whole saga, the Taxel hoax, and you can look this up yourself. In the Taxel hoax, he was poking at the Catholic Church and Freemasons. And so in his stories, he basically alluded to the Illuminati and the secret rulers of the world, and they made dark sacrifices to the devil. I think they call them the Dark Paladins or whatever. But normal Freemasons wouldn't know about this. You had to be high enough level before you were brought in. So that's what people tell me and my other brothers. We're just not high enough level yet. Well, that all comes from the Taxel hoax. And he would write more and more ridiculous things. And so people they bought into it. They ate it up. Until finally, he came out and admitted at a press conference, this is fake. I made all this stuff up. And yet, despite the fact that he himself said that he was lying, it's still used as evidence today that Freemasons do evil things. And people still believe it as truth, which in and of itself speaks volumes to our culture and to our people. That is the source of Freemasonry is evil. Now, all we do in Lodge, and I'm not giving away any secrets, everything in a Masonic Lodge deals with the Old Testament. So it's not a religion, but it's very spiritual and God-oriented. And we focus and deal with the Old Testament with a sprinkling of some things from the New Testament, with the exception that the Knights Templar, the Masonic Knights Templar, are a very Christian organization. We swear oaths on the Christian church, and they're very New Testament based. One of the biggest responses from people that I've seen come through who had preconceived notions after they've gone through everything is the phrase, "That's it?" Because they were expecting, I think, to learn to fly or shoot lightning bolts out of their fingers or their eyes or whatever, learn supernatural powers, and none of Masonry is that. That's not Masonry at all. and even through the advanced degrees, that you will never learn to do anything supernatural. Like that is not what we are about. That is all fantastical fairy tale nonsense. A few other people I've known in my life have joined with the expectation that's what they were going to receive, and were disappointed when they didn't. They basically received a bunch of moral lessons, which they found to be less than what they were hoping for. To me, after now having gone through the 32nd degree, having gone through the York Rite, having been a part of other orders, I fully understand how powerful those degrees are and how life-changing they can be. And that's kind of what I wanted to discuss. Why should we bother joining? If you're coming in hoping to find magical powers and whatnot, you're not going to find those. Esoteric orders in the West, anyhow, man, they've a lot of them have been cheapened over the decades. A lot of them are grift mills. There's a lot of stuff out there. The true mysteries all come from in here. And everything that you learn, if you're going in with the solemn attitude of taking those degrees and applying them to your life, you already know right now. Everyone listening, if you've never done them before, you already know everything that you're going to hear in those degrees. That's the thing. We already know so much. But it is through reflecting on those degrees that we are able to build a spiritual temple. And that's what we're doing. As Freemasons, we are building a spiritual temple in dedication to God, our Creator. The esoteric stuff, when people hear esoterics, they think about all, the wizard and the sorcerer, magic spells and incantations and whatnot. And in some esoteric orders, that's true. There are spells and rituals, but in a Catholic church, there are rituals. In any church you go to today, as they're dancing around and moving about in a circle and they're raising energy to God, that's a ritual. It's the same thing, expressed in different ways. The esoteric path is not an easy one. It is more of a direct path to trying to reunite ourselves with the divine. Freemasonry is the porch of the esoterics. When I say porch, I mean it's the outer portion. So when you go through the 3 degrees of the Blue Lodge, and then you go through the York Rite, and you go through the Scottish Rite, and you get all those degrees, you are now able to enter from the porch into a mystical order and have a better understanding and foundation. But Freemasonry itself, to me, from my perspective of having been in other orders, is the porch. The first 3 degrees you receive in the Blue Lodge is nothing more than laying your cornerstones, in my opinion. You're laying the cornerstones and a basic foundation to build upon. And it takes years to truly understand just those 3 degrees. And so what do you learn? What are those 3 degrees? I just said that's the porch to the mysteries, to the other mysteries. And it is. So what are we learning? What are we're understanding? So again, everything comes from the Bible. Everything comes from the Old Testament. We are taught as men first that we are men, and we are taught to revere God, the God in the Bible, or whatever God you happen to believe, if you're Hindu, if you're Buddhist, if you're a Muslim, it doesn't matter. You're God, the creator. The creator wears many faces. Second, we're taught to learn to control our emotions. Does that sound diabolical and evil? That's one of the most important lessons. It's one of the first that we have to learn. How to control your emotions, how to control your passions so that they're not controlling you. Discipline. We are then taught to control our mind, to discipline our mind, to sharpen our wits on classical education, which is missing in our society. We are taught how to understand the written word and are encouraged to read it, and not just the funny pages or the comics, but works like from Plato and Aristotle, the holy writings of the Bible. There's a litany of different works that can be used that provide, still to this day, that classical bedrock of education that is missing. We are taught how to learn, how to perceive from right from wrong, what's logic, how to be able to form our own opinions without letting other people form them for us. We are then taught how, through rhetoric, to evenly discuss topics and debate without becoming overly emotional. We are taught the importance of mathematics. We are taught the importance of geometry, of resonance or musical harmonies, and of astronomy and the celestial bodies. We are taught to sharpen our minds. And last, we are taught to not fear death, because we know that there is more to this world than this material shell that we are sitting in. Whatever faith you may be. I'm a Gnostic. Gnosticism has always rung deep bells inside of me. That is what I believe. I believe that the kingdom of heaven is within us. I believe that's what Christ was teaching us. Other people disagree with me, and that's fine. They have their own path. Now, from there, in the Blue Lodge, you can just spend years just honing those things, honing those pieces. Before I move into the advanced degrees. In the advanced degrees, there are a lot of hidden hidey holes, but the public-facing ones, we have York Rite and the Scottish Rite and the Shrine. I'm not a Shriner, so I can't speak to what the Shrine does. I know that they erect hospitals and they help children, and they give mightily to the community. The York Rite is the only American-created rite, so that's America's contribution to Freemasonry. And it completes the third degree, essentially, through another set of important lessons, moral lessons. You learn to value spirituality. You learn you learn how to accept your wages, right? You learn how to not take credit for work that you've not done. You learn honesty, justice, fidelity, courage. If you advance farther, you become a Knight Templar. Take upon yourself the chivalric oath of a knight. And while modern-day knights don't ride around on horses and dress in armor and fight, with their swords, the chivalric tenets are still applicable to our lives today, to our communities, to our nation. Contrast that with the Scottish Rite. The Scottish Rite is very granular, and there are many more lessons. Some of those relate to York. Some of those are their own thing, and they open you up to understanding our work, which is through spiritual alchemy, which is by taking our base matter and putting in the work to elevate ourselves to gold, which is why it's hard to see, but we receive a gold ring after one of our degrees, is to remind us to strive, or at least this reminds me, to strive to maintain that state of mind through all my interactions with people. It also opens up doors to showing you that other things exist, other mystical traditions exist, such as alchemy, such as the Kabbalah, Gnostic readings, etc. You don't have to go into those things, but it exposes the brothers to know that those things exist. So I came into it backwards. I have already been deeply entrenched in those things, and I backed into the Scottish Rite and was exposed to it there, already having a good idea of what that stuff was. But it's going to take me years to unpack those 29 extra degrees that I received. And I plan on it. There is a form of a college called the Master Builders Workshop, which I am going to tackle, which gets into real deep symbology in the normal Blue Lodge, which is our basic lodge that you first start in, and all of those 29 degrees. I plan on delving deep into those because I take this very seriously. And again, going back, this is the outer porch of the mysteries in general. So I talk about the mysteries real quick. Let me explain what that is and the history of the mysteries. Pappus tells us, and Pappus was a mystic from the late 1800s who helped form the Martinist order. But Pappus tells us that the lesser mysteries in Egypt were more secondary school. So anything you would learn through like middle school and high school today, that was the lesser mysteries of Egypt. And by going through that type of education, you were qualified to be a magistrate or be a therapist or work in a number of professions. You knew basic mathematics, that kind of thing. And the greater mysteries was what you'd be taught in a university, in a classically trained university. I don't consider a lot of what goes on in universities today to be very useful. And I believe that is by design, because we carry a bunch of degrees today that have very little meaning in life, which is unfortunate. It's a grift. The greater mysteries also, in Greece, we had the Eleusinian mysteries. And the Eleusinian mysteries and other Greco-Roman mysteries kind of tie into Freemasonry. Now, what happened was, after the Common Era, the Apostolic Era, there was a conflict over what religion was the right religion. You might have heard this story before. We hear it every day. And there were varying sects of Christianity that were fighting over who was going to be the dominant one. And Emperor Constantine in 325 of the Common Era, he had a divided empire on his hands, and he needed to solidify the people, so he chose religion to do that. And Emperor Constantine was not a Christian, but he pretended to be one. He was actually a worshiper of Mithras. So a lot of the pagan holidays and the sun worship of Mithras can be found in Christianity today. And that's for another video for another time, but if you pay attention, you can find them on your own. From there, about 100 years later, the persecution of any of the pagans or the Gnostics, etc., was in full force. The library in Alexandria was evacuated. The temples were closed down. The school in Alexandria was closed down. Gnostic writings were deemed heretical, and if you were found with them, you would be burned along with those writings. And so all of that knowledge was purged, and all of those people fled to the Middle East, to what is today, Turkey, Baghdad, etc. And eventually, they would make their way to a city known as Haran, which is in Turkey, or was. It is the ruins of which are in Turkey. And in Haran, the Sabians of Haran were formed. They were one of the people of the Old Book to gain protection under Islamic law. And the Sabians of Haran consisted of, among others, the old Hermeticists and Gnostics that were driven out of Western and Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, because Constantinople, by the Byzantine Empire, they were Orthodox Christians, and they also expelled anything not related to what they said was the proper and correct way. Interesting to note that Western Rome and Eastern Rome disagreed very much on religion, and that's the Orthodox Church broke off from Western Rome. Another topic for another video. From there, Haran and Baghdad, those were centers of learning and intellectualism. Great strides made in mathematics and science. And then the Crusades happen, and the Knights Templar come on the scene. And I've discussed those in depth. I'm not going to go into that, but the Knights Templar recovered those mysteries, those mystery schools that were driven out, and they brought them back to Western Europe, and they hid them in plain sight through symbols, through things like the tarot, Kabbalistic teachings, which the Jews in France, the Bogomils, rediscovered around the 11th century. It's not a good way to prove when the Kabbalah started, but there are strong indicators it was from around the apostolic era, right around when the books of Enoch were written. The Hermetic texts were kind of being written. Of course, those come a couple centuries later. But the Kabbalah, there are Kabbalistic writings and some Greek texts from the very end of the before the Common Era. And the first known depiction of a tree of life, which is scholarly debated, so I'm telling you something that some scholars will say that's a bunch of horse crap, was from a guy named Celsus in the 2nd century. So anyway, Kabbalah's been around for a while. The exact date no one knows, but anyhow, the Knights Templar, they injected a lot of the mysteries from the Kabbalah. The Jews were... They latched onto that as their own, and they really injected a lot of their mysticism into it. And again, the tarot was hiding symbols in plain sight. And then the Templars were eventually murdered. They were later forgiven by the church, but they were brutally murdered in an attempt to suppress them and get their money. Now, all that's being said, that's kind of like the super fast version of the mysteries and what I'm talking about. Freemasonry is said, no one knows where it came from, so one of the legends says that the Templars helped create the Masons by, again, hiding in plain sight, because the Templars were responsible for the creation of these cathedrals and these mighty, bastions, etc., of sacred geometry. So they had stonemasons, and they hid amongst them, and they passed these rituals down through them, and from that, so legend says, Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry was born and seeded in the 1400s or so, and began to flourish in the late 1500s and 1600s. That's legend. The earliest Masonic writings we have are from 1598, the Shaw Edicts or the Shaw Statutes. The first recorded initiation of a Freemason was Elias Ashmole in 1648. But there were other Masons present, so they had to have been initiated at some point, right? The oldest Masonic writing period is a poem written in 1380 called the Regius Poem. Then there are traces of legend going back into the Dark Ages through like King Athelstan and his Freemasons. So no one knows, and no one ever will, because I don't believe you're going to find those right. No one wrote that stuff down. A lot of this is oral tradition. And oral tradition is oral tradition for a reason. And as such, you're not going to find written proof. So whatever legend you want to latch onto, go for it, right? And part of me thinks that the actual history may not be as important as what it's trying to communicate. And Freemasonry is communicating the outer segment of those mysteries, the porch of those mysteries, and offers you an attempt to get into, if you wish, more in-depth alchemy. Hermetic principles, Hermetic text, Gnosticism, the Kabbalah, astrology, all kinds of things that the church says is a no-no. One of the things we are taught in Freemasonry is that we are tolerant of everything except for intolerance. It is a brotherhood that recognizes multiple paths leading to the same summit. Regardless of your religion, regardless of your politics, regardless of what color you are, all of that stuff means nothing. And that's why I am so in tune with it, because these are beliefs that I've held my entire life. Now, a lot of Freemasonry is it's a fraternity, it's a social club, and that's fine because men need that today. We're missing that in our lives. But for those who wish to dig deeper, there is an entire ocean underneath of information, of symbols, of meditations, of thoughts, philosophies. You could take it as far as you want to go, and it's up to you to do that. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door shall be opened unto you. And those are the words that I will leave you with. I thank you for watching this and kind of letting me give you a rehash of my weekend and my thoughts on Freemasonry and why I joined it. If you have any other experiences, please leave them in the comments below. If you like this content, give me a subscribe. It helps YouTube know that people like this type of content and not the inane AI slop videos that seem to be everywhere instead. For now, I wish you good health. I bid you adieu. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.